For those of you that have been in the room all day, you'll know that I'm Paul at IDMWORKS.com, Paul Bedi, co-CEO with Todd at IDMWORKS, who's also Todd at IDMWORKS.com. The reason I tell you that is not shameless self-promotion of email address. It's if you want the presentation, you should email us and just let us know. We'll send it out to you. It's a lot easier than waiting till you get home or back to the office and trying to remember to ask us for the presentation. Anyways, we're a consulting advisory firm. We did a ping webinar on cloud readiness assessment a few weeks ago. If you had attended that, this is much of the same content. If you didn't attend that, we had about 450 people attend. So if you didn't attend that, this is a good replay for that cloud readiness assessment. So
just ask them straight up. Anyone here attend it?
No.
Okay, there you go. So I want to thank everybody for coming in, by the way. This was a great session. Thank you. I guess that's the last one for the day.
No, kidding.
Just messing with you. Oh, they were going to clap. If we do it again, you'll know why. Sorry, go ahead.
All right.
We have 50 minutes, so we're going to play.
So this thing's not going to be very effective today. So a couple things. Who here, can I get a survey, has moved applications to the cloud? Your ERP or other? Okay, great. What kind of application?
Anything from internal claims apps to HR.
Claims apps to HR. Okay, and yourself? Okay. Were the applications built for the cloud, or did you actually lift and shift?
Lift and shift.
Lift and shift, okay.
Specifically for
Okay, and there's a third gentleman right behind you.
So actually, the first phase was we just blocked new applications that have to be cloud-based.
Okay.
But now it's actual development going on. No movement right now.
Okay.
There's one more over there as well. This gentleman over there on the left. Well, my left, your right, you as well.
What did you move to the cloud?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Okay. And so.
One more.
Yep. Okay. And so how did you all, the conversation today is, how did you all assess your readiness or that application's readiness to move to the cloud? Right? Is it just as simple as saying, hey, I'm going to take SAP, lift and shift the entire thing to the cloud? Or did you do some work to move it to the cloud? And that's sort of where we fall into this conversation around a cloud readiness assessment. Did you use a tool or did you not use a tool? And so when we help our customers, we take a 4-stage approach, and then obviously you've heard the theme, and I'm going to do this again and again the last time for today, which is plan, build, run. That's the steps we're going to follow. This is largely the plan step, right? So first you look at assessing, assess what your application is, and you have to use a tool to do that. It's not just as simple as saying, hey, I'm going to move SAP to the cloud, and one day you turn on an AWS server and you're done, right? You've got to look at all of the interdependencies, and how do you do that? Then you've got to look at building a roadmap to the cloud. So a lot of our customers will take the myopic approach of saying, I'm going to move my application to the cloud, and simply just spin the CD, install the software, connect back to my home base authoritative sources or data sources, and then perform some sort of a migration or cutover.
And thank you. Thank you, guys. We're happy you were able to attend the presentation. I guess that was the last one for the day. Thank you.
Oh, is it moving again?
No, I was just doing that for you. I was just messing with you. Sorry, Paul. I cut you off.
I swear to God, I'm not moving slides, but this is doing. The third is actually making the migration happen, and the last step is managing once you've got to the cloud. And so two sessions ago, I did a session on managed services versus managed support, and this is part and parcel and actually paramount to moving applications to the cloud. The management paradigm is completely different, and there's a lot of folks in the market that call themselves a managed service provider versus a managed support provider, and you've got to be able to differentiate these folks and what they do for you, and actually work with your procurement folks to monitor and manage what these folks are doing for you. So,
if I may,
you may.
We're going on to that, Paul. Just to add on, sorry, I'm going to do this. We're going to have a little show this whole time. Since you brought up managed support versus managed service, right? We're going to just a quick 1-2, which is the difference between an organization that's going to host it for you, right, true managed service in that regard, but then you get the managed support services, which is, it can be in your own data center, your cloud environment, et cetera, which Paul's going to hit on in a second. And they are really the outsourced support team. They're the outsourced operations guys. You have it in your own model, and they take care of it. Sorry, Paul.
Right. So the way this started for us 6 years ago was our customers asked us to move them from data center A to data center B, right? For whatever reason it was, they wanted a type 4 data center. They were moving from a type 1 to type 4 data center. So what did we have to do? We had to map out all of the application dependencies. But what did that require? That required us to be in their data center and inventory all of their applications or servers, and then all of the applications that were on all of those servers, and then migrate them from one data center to the other, right? We started 4 years ago or 5 years ago with guys with cameras, notepads, and things like that in server rooms, writing everything down, because most of our customers, most large enterprises, have a bunch of things in their data center that they're not aware of, right? And today we're using automation. So this is a list here of some of the challenges that we've seen when folks are moving to the cloud. Okay.
Yeah, no, I asked him to go back one because this was an interesting one. I want to actually ask the audience a question on this one. Do you see the third one there, risk of changing and failing can damage both the organization's bottom line and reputation? Has anybody here picked up, I don't mean physically, but picked up a server, you've moved the server from point A to point B, you moved from on-site to cloud, or vice versa, and broke a whole bunch of crap down the line because something was hard-coded? Yeah? Oh, hey, so this was timely. And yeah, isn't that always lovely? So even when it was like moving co-location facilities, opposed to, back in the day, even from physical to physical, you always ran, if you didn't do a good assessment, as Paul's alluding to, and he's going to show you a bunch of stuff. What ends up happening is, we didn't know that. This thing was hard-coded. And we just took the business down. And the alarms went off at 3 in the morning or whatever it may be. And yeah, it's never good. So it's a big process in this to make sure you got right. It shouldn't be difficult, but if it's time-consuming, it needs to be time-consuming because it's got to be done right. Start with that one, Paul. Yep.
So our first step, as I was saying, is plan in assessing cloud readiness. And so if it'll flip. Okay, so what we're talking about is why do you want to assess, right? We've beat this horse to death a little bit in the beginning of this presentation, but essentially what we're typically thinking about when we say we're moving from on-prem data center to the cloud is we're thinking single stack server moving to the cloud to a VM of some sort. But what happens if you have a VM cluster or 1,000 VM servers that you want to move to the cloud? Does that change your thought about how complex it is to move to the cloud from an on-prem solution? Right, it should give you some pause. And then where are the silos of information for all of the applications that are hosted on your VM cluster or in your data center amongst all of the physical and virtual servers? Typically, most of our clients will have this in an SCCM system or some sort of spreadsheet, but not all and completely documented. And so what we prefer and what I keep emphasizing, and we'll show you some of the examples of this, is that there are tools out there in the marketplace that'll actually go survey your network and all of your VMs and be able to provide these what look like spider diagrams of dependencies that you can then take and analyze. Those products will then take those dependencies and all of the infrastructure related to them and then map out the cost for you to actually move to specific cloud providers. Godly?
What he said. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do it yet. I was just joking. Really, part of our soul, as he said, to this, right? This goes back to exactly what we're saying in terms of that documentation, that aspect of the assessment that needs to take place. The other piece of it, and you'll see a little bit more of this, is when we're assessing it, we also need to prioritize. A lot of organizations, when we're talking again, 1,000 of these things to move. What ends up happening, right? We go, ooh, it's really big. Do we do it all at once? Can we do it all at once? Can we segment this to say, this is the group, first group run, we're good, stable, second group run, etc. Can we phase it out? Some aspects can be phased out, some cannot. The goal being, and Paul's going to get a little deeper on this, is that If they want to go big bang, run for the hills. Big bang is a tough approach to do. They want to move everything in one good shot. It's really tough to do. You may be able to do it, but the odds that something's going to come up is going to be a problem. And even when you go back to the days of, when we want to make changes to a system from an engineering perspective, or even coding, did we do one thing, test, make sure that thing works, or a couple things we know we can do so that if it breaks, we know what to go back to? Or do we do everything in one shot and then we'll go test it? Well, that's the problem when these get big and onerous of that nature. We want to have not just everything documented out from a mapping perspective as well, but how are we going to test this thing effectively? And if we can't because it's too big, at the end of the day, we got to slow down, we got to take a step back, we got to make some real decisions there. And then, of course, the old return on investment versus risk of incarceration version of ROI, right? The other ROI, saying that, hey, we know that this is being financially driven in some aspects, but what does it do from a risk perspective? Have we looked and truly strategized around the cloud aspect of this to say that this will still be secure, that we're going to still follow all of the rules and regulations that we're required to follow? Even if we think we're just shoving the risk off on a managed service provider, we still have a certain amount of culpability that comes into this, and that's going to get thrown against us. So if we do this haphazardly, yeah, our ROI becomes risk of incarceration. We certified everything was good, the data was good, and then it didn't happen, and the company got fined, a couple people went to jail. We're trying to avoid that. Sorry, Paul.
Okay, so our checklist, it's an 11-step checklist, and this is typically the process that we go through, and we've been going through for the last couple of years when we're using an automated tool. So at the foundation of it, we're starting to assess the device inventory. Then we start to look at the network dependencies. Of course, you build on top of that the application inventories, the groupings, the stacks of applications that are on top of that. And then you have to come up with a report, right? You come up with essentially your current as-is state and then your gap state. And then you've got to figure out a way to resolve any issues that you find. So if there's dependencies of applications that need to be split apart that you don't intentionally want to move to the cloud, then you have to figure out a way to separate that data or those applications out. Once you do that, now you've got to figure out where you're going to move these applications. So then you have to use a tool or some logic around what your providers are going to charge you to move your applications to the cloud. And that has to be compared and contrasted with what it costs to keep on premise. And then, of course, all of the things that Todd alluded to, which are performance metrics and the management of that. And then finally, you come up with your cloud migration plan, and that's just the planning step before you ever move an application to the cloud. So this is the checklist for cloud migration.
And by the way, so we're going to go to the next one. Anybody who wants a copy of this? At the end, we'll send you a copy pretty much today afterwards. Either Paul at IDMWORKS.com or Todd at IDMWORKS.com. You can have a whole copy of the deck. Because I always feel bad when people are like quickly trying to get the picture before we go to the next one kind of thing. Like when you're watching your kid as he graduates, but you're recording it and you never actually looked up to see him. It's the same sort of idea. So feel free to just hit us with an email and we'll send it out to you at the end of this. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
So this is the actual roadmap in sort of a plan, build, run format on how to assess what you're moving to the cloud and the application rationalization. If I flip to the next slide, you'll see there's a colorful chart and a little bit of an eye chart on what to look at. But essentially, what you want to look at when you're assessing your application and trying to move it to the cloud are things like IP addresses, network equipment, operating systems, CPU, ports, power states, virtual disks, those type of things. So it's not as simple as just saying, hey, what are my application and my application dependencies? You have to look at all of the minutia associated with it. And you'll see down there at the bottom, there's a lot more information on the eye chart that you can get from these applications that do the assessment for you.
Yeah. So along the lines of this, and you'll see this in terms of this process, the reason you skipped the first one with the arrows there was these are the drill downs of the four aspects that were brought up. The point being that when we do that asset inventory and make sure that we have that data, the other piece of it, again, hard coding, mappings and the like, this can also then be utilized once we move forward from a requirements perspective. because if we need to up some of these things when we move them to their next state, i.e. in this case the cloud, this is our chance. So when we look at this thing, we know there's so-and-so application was running sluggishly for a long time now, and somebody said, yeah, here's our chance when we do it, since it's basically a virtualized version here out in the cloud, that we can add CPU strength, we can add memory, we can really up our game if now's the time to do it, and especially when we move it there, if the plan is, from a requirements perspective, which we didn't really hit on too deeply, that this thing's now going to go from 100,000 users from a customer perspective into potentially the millions. And if we just lift and move into a cloud model and we haven't taken that into consideration, we're going to get hit hard. This is the way for us to get the facts that we want to use around it, but we have to understand from it what are then the requirements for that next step. Do we need to increase, decrease, whatever it may be?
Cool. And then this is the spaghetti diagrams that I was talking about earlier, where the applications actually go in and they do dependency mapping between client and server and server and server. And so typically we'll see a lot of traffic between a small group of servers, and that to us indicates things like, for example, a finance application where machines are communicating with each other that are natural dependencies that we would never have thought of needing to migrate when we do the migration planning. And so I know that these are a little bit of an eye chart, like I said, but the applications are really sophisticated, and this is a segment of the migration that a lot of our customers that are doing this typically manually are not taking into consideration. And so what happens when you have a bunch of communication, network communication between either client and server or server and server that you never anticipated, right? There's no automated way to fix that. It ends up being manual intervention or human intervention to go do that discovery to figure out how or why to migrate those applications.
Right, and to add on to that as well, this is speaking to, and you'll see this in terms of that 3 steps at the end, utilization of a tool. We see this across the board, not just in terms of cloud strategy, but really across the board in terms of IT systems when there are actually tools that can help versus doing it manually. We all want to save a buck, but what does it really cost us in the end? For example, we're going to clean up our own data issues versus have a tool which goes out and discovers, and it's a similar thing here. And when you get a print out of this, or if we send it to you, you can drill down into this. But the whole point being that this is a tool-related set in order to do this, and we can go over a little bit of that towards the tail end. But the point being that if you want to do this effectively, so that you don't have a system you didn't know about that gets taken down, utilize a good tool set that actually has the capabilities to go out and interrogate what are those connection points and build that map. And since we had an example of it, or it just came up, it's speaking exactly to it. And I can't tell you the number of organizations we've gone to where it's continued to be a manual effort. And most of the technologies you've learned about at the entirety of this conference are about things that will automate or enforce automation, enforce management, etc. We want to understand that even discovery and mapping, we want to make sure if the tools are available, if they make sense, we want to take a look at buying something. It really does make a difference, and this isn't, neither one of us are sales guys here. I'm just telling you that it does make a difference from the manual aspect, because the manual relies on that old people process piece versus the technology.
Yeah.
So the tools like flag, it's apples by candy, it's got hard code.
So that's coming up, right? That's the classification piece. So
Yep.
first, now that you've done your application dependency mapping, right? Client, server, right? You get into cost modeling, right? And so here's where we take a look at, hey, where do I want to move this application to? And a lot of folks that don't do this analysis with a tool, they move their application, sort of like we've done in the past with our own applications, right? We've moved on-prem applications to the cloud. We've looked at it and said, okay, look, it was costing us $8 a month for the actual physical infrastructure to host it in the data center. And now when we move it to public cloud, it's costing us $400 a month. And so these tools will do that analysis for you and compare and contrast the growth over time as well. And so you can start to do modeling with these to say, this is what it's going to cost me over the long term.
Well, I mean, these are modern sport vendor applications, and they probably have a version that works well. But I mean, you've got a
Right, but at the same time, you still should be able to have data to utilize for cost modeling, because if you're going to take even old legacy 1985, you're going to move it, at a minimum, you're going to get an understanding of what that cloud cost is, right? What we can get monthly. And granted, maybe you don't know that maybe there's a negative cost in using it right now. It's not costing you anything. You might actually be making money off it at the end of the day of what you currently have. But that doesn't mean it supports the proper infrastructure, because it goes back to 85. Yeah.
So you're right, and that's the point of this slide here. It's to talk about preparing a cloud readiness report for your organization once you've done the analysis, right? Not all workloads are suitable to move off-prem into the cloud. And so that's sort of where you come up with this last step in your planning to say, here's the classification of all of the applications that I analyzed using these tools, and here's the cost, and maybe based on cost, they're not candidates to move, but maybe based on the type of application they are and their ability to move to the cloud, I don't want to move them, right? They don't have the technology that supports it.
Or additionally, maybe it's time to get rid of that tool from 85. Hate to say it, it may actually help to get that impetus to move to that next tool. Of course, if it's just 10 people and they're using that tool in the organization, you're probably not going to move it anyways. But now's the time to say, well, why am I still using it? What is the true value behind it? Is it only that it doesn't cost me anything, but it's, got a green screen interface that somebody built that, the password can't have, two of the same characters and all those funny rules that you get in the like? This may actually help to build that argument as to why it's time to move off of such a tool.
Right. So then this last slide is sort of our way of saying, hey, in your planning, are you taking into consideration all of these factors when inventorying your application? Because we think they're important, and in our experience, they've been important to make an actual decision on whether to move your application to the cloud or not. Right, it's a little bit of an eye chart, and that's why Todd's been advertising our email addresses just to send this to you. But these are all of the data points that I believe that you need to collect about your servers and your applications before you plan to move them to the cloud. And if you actually get that on your phone, that picture on your phone, I'll be surprised. And why is this important? I don't think all of the data independently is important, right? But I think it helps you cluster certain attributes to make those decisions, to say, okay, what's my power costing me? What's my, what kind of CPUs do I need, and those type of things. So there's a lot of data here that can be sorted through, but obviously all of this data is necessary in order to move to the cloud and assess your readiness when you're moving to the cloud. So the second step is the build step. And we talked a little bit about this earlier today, which is redundancy, resiliency, and active DR, or just DR in general. I would argue that most folks that are moving and designing a redundant infrastructure in a public or private cloud type of a scenario are that they overdo it. So we always think about, hey, what does my application have to look like in order for me to have absolute redundancy in the cloud? And so you start breaking out regions, geographic regions, sub-regions within a geography, and then you put load balancers. Then you actually put one internationally, and you say, okay, just in case my data needs to be moved somewhere internationally or protected internationally, I'll move it there. And they end up spending 4 or 5x what they're spending on-prem in a DR model with AWS or one of the public cloud providers. So that's the first point. The second thing is you have to inventory what your needs are in terms of power, application, data, and database. So it's easy to say, hey, look, I'm going to move to some private data center and I'm going to alleviate myself from the public cloud problems. But what kind of power are you going to need in that data center when you migrate all of your applications and server to that private data center? And do they have the power to meet your requirements and your growth requirements as well? The last piece is, can your data move? Right? So some folks look at a pure private data center, some look at a pure public data center, but there's also folks that are looking at some sort of a hybrid model between the two. Can you move your data seamlessly between the two paradigms in order to provide the resilience that you need for your customers?
So another piece around the data, actually, which I brought up in a couple of sessions, and I think Paul's even brought up in a couple of sessions as well, is to remember that if you currently have orphan data out there, the type where there's some key components and people who've managed or controlled it have left the organization, and now we're picking this thing up and we're moving it somewhere, but certain aspects of that are getting left in the old legacy because it involved people who aren't here anymore. You could end up with an even worse case scenario. When you move this over, any of that old data could end up, and it may be important, going away completely. So part of the need and part of the aspect is to do sort of a risk analysis in that respect as to, again, on those analysis charts, to make sure we're not leaving anything behind that will potentially be at risk, especially if it's financial related, PII, healthcare data, etc. It has, at some organizations we've been to, been a big issue. They've moved, didn't do the proper data analysis, and then decommissioned the old equipment. And when they decommissioned the old stuff, they dumped all the things that didn't move with it and lost some real data that they needed and never to be seen again because they decommissioned all aspects of it, including the backups, etc.
Okay, so the next key factor that we're going to talk about is resiliency. And so a lot of folks that are moving applications to the cloud, as I said, when they do the inventory piece and the planning, they're looking at all of the network, power, applications, dependencies, but not taking into account resiliency around things like APIs and microservices that are available in the applications. And so when you're architecting your application for the cloud, you've got to take all of those things into account. But now that you're moving to a public cloud and providing some sort of a DR or a redundant type of deployment, you've got to make sure that all of your microservices are available as well. On top of that, once you've done that sort of legwork and figured out how to make your microservices available and your data available across your different redundant zones, you've then got to start doing what you've done internally, which is your entire security posture and paradigm, which is pen testing and security checking your cloud environment. And so how do you do that? Do you simply use the same tools that you're using on-prem, or do you buy a new set of tools? And what else do you have to do now that your crown jewels are exposed on the internet as opposed to behind some firewall for your enterprise? So,
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were. He didn't do the hand thing.
Yeah, the last piece is your SLA. You've got to make sure that your on-prem SLA for your applications is mimicked in the cloud, in your cloud paradigm. So a lot of organizations forget these basic block and tackle things and setting up the resiliency for their cloud environment.
There we go. So key sticking point with that, again, a number of organizations that have said, we're just going to move it to the cloud. I can't tell you how many times we've met, and they go, oh, we're just going to move it to the cloud. And it makes you want to scream when the organization just flat out says that. What they're saying is, I want to move the risk to the cloud, to that organization that's going to take care of it. And as Paul stated, they abandon their checks and balances. Now, you may not have to do that forever because you are relying on a service to do it, but you have to, first and foremost, make sure that it's getting done effectively and test it every once in a while. There's the old term, trust but verify. We've all heard that one before. What does it mean? It means don't trust. We just don't like to say it the mean way. Don't trust them. We just say trust but verify. It still means don't trust. So you do have to do those initial checks and balances, and every once in a while, make sure that they're still occurring. Even if the organization that's taking care of it now, whether it's just from a pure hosting perspective, they say, as part of it, we do a yearly whatever pen test, etc. You need to audit these guys. You need to still audit them. And it doesn't matter how big that organization is. You still have to make sure that they're actually doing what they say they're doing, because if they don't, granted, they're the first guys in the line of sight for the court filing when my data got out there. But you know what? I'm not stopping there. I don't care that you went to them. I'm still suing you too. I'm suing everybody. Nobody sues one group, one person. They sue everybody. So you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence across time to make sure that those guys are doing their jobs. And I don't care if it's Amazon. I don't care who it is. You still want to make sure that that job is being done and that you're auditing that. And that may include a shift of the role of some of the folks within the organization. If right now you're babysitting these systems, you're not going to have to do it anymore, and you're going, wow, what am I going to do? I've heard that before. What am I going to do for the rest of the time? This is part of it. You're moving into that security perspective now to say, I got to make sure that these things are actually getting done. Maybe we don't need as many people, but it's still a job that needs to get done. And organizations that don't, they find out the hard way.
And then disaster recovery is the last piece, the third circle that we're talking about. So what we typically want you to consider are things like number of zones, number of regions, number of zones within regions, geographical distribution, and ultimately these geographic regions should tie back to your SLAs that you provided the business. So your application, just because it moves to the cloud in your planning stage, should not forego your SLAs that you've committed to when they're on-prem, just because they move to the cloud. So tying all these three things together, right, we've got redundancy, resiliency, and disaster recovery. It's really the core of your planning for your cloud readiness.
Ditto.
Yep.
You like
Good.
that?
And let us not forget, right, we're at an identity security type of a conference. I think it's really important for us to remember that all of the things that we did on premise have to extend out to the cloud. So things like provisioning, user lifecycle management, privileged user management, single sign-on, and those type of things need to be now extended to the cloud. Your PAM solution to manage all of the new cloud paradigm type of accounts. So you're going to have new Unix accounts or Windows accounts in the cloud. You're going to have new administrator accounts for your AWS account, SSH keys, etc. All of these things need now to be brought back onto premise and managed through your on-premise solution or through a secondary or the cloud version of your IGA vendor solution.
For 2 days, we've been beating into everybody at every one of the sessions the whole people, process, technology. If we go technology first, we don't think about the people involved. We don't go through the process, or we can't even explain it. How does this work with the people? Which we talked about, and you see in there, people who understand not just the assets, the process, et cetera, and that's the next step, the process. What are those processes, procedures? How are we tracking them, keeping them up to date? And on top of it, fixing the gaps. If we don't go that route before we go into technology, you're screwed. We're all screwed. That's the problem with it. We jump straight into the technology, but we don't fix the problems. We don't take care of the gaps. What ends up happening? We put this thing into play, something breaks, they come after us, or, we lose something. Data goes, it gets out there, breaches, things that we should have planned for while we had it on-prem, we didn't do a good job of. Now we're moving it to a bigger environment. We still didn't fix the people process problem. We didn't clean up the data. We just moved it into the cloud and said, that'll fix it. Sure, it'll cook a dinner and pick your kids up from school and pick up your dry cleaning while it's at it, right? We can't get sold on that, and that's the only real sort of unfortunate aspect of it, is that if we go that route and we haven't aligned the people in the process, and we go straight to the tech, it's going to happen every single time. There's going to be those breakdowns, and we're going to be the biggest suckers for listening to the vendor who said that it'll pick our kids up from school.
Oh, I think I pressed it twice. Okay. I think one of the things that most of us forget is that we need new people in our paradigm, in our organizations, then to manage cloud applications, right? I would argue and say that there's many folks, but I wanted to highlight three of them. One is the cloud architects. So now you need these unicorns that are really highly paid unicorns that are now cloud architects to figure out the Amazon or Azure or Google private cloud type of paradigm to architect your applications correctly. And these folks are also going to drive governance within your organization and make sure that the cloud usage is properly sanctioned and used correctly in a deployment pattern that they support. You're also going to need product managers from IT and business, and these are the folks that are going to say, this is how we're going to use this application, this is the type of application we're going to migrate to this zone in this private cloud or public cloud. And these poor folks in procurement are the ones that end up owning all of this. They're the ones that have to budget and then figure out what the long-term costs are going to be of your cloud application in a cloud, public or private cloud paradigm.
No, I got nothing more to add to that one. Well, you know what? No, I will, because I got a couple minutes here. But holy cow, it is this huge. If you go out there and you search on cloud architects, it's all over the map what the skill set is and what they cost, and it's You gotta love it when there's a brand new thing. It's like the guys who fix the batteries now in the Teslas, or the electrical. It's a whole new field. The guys who were mechanics before, they can't touch it. They don't know what to do with all that stuff. So you get this whole new aspect within the industry, right? Kind of like cloud architects. It's getting kind of interesting.
Wow, yeah, you were quick. Oh, did I go too fast?
No, you're on
I
21.
think one of my slides.
No,
is
you're going the
missing.
wrong way. There you go. Oh, you're on 22.
Oh,
which
so
one?
I'll go back to that slide in a second. However,
Okay.
so running your applications, the last step is running your applications in the cloud, right? So you've now planned, you've done all of the gap analysis, identified all of the critical steps to move your application to the cloud. You've done the build, right? You've figured out how to build and architect. You've put the right people in place, both on the business, the technical, all of the architects, all of the governance, all of the identity management tools are all in the cloud, or managing your cloud applications at least. The next step is running your application out in the cloud. So now to run your application in the cloud, you've got a lot of industry-specific tools to monitor and manage those services, right? You've got to make sure that you're monitoring not just web interfaces, but also all of the microservices and workloads that are running, making sure that they're all completing correctly and that you've got the right procedures in place for your operations teams to then respond when those applications aren't running correctly. You've also got to make sure that any of the logs coming out of those systems that are up in the cloud are now funneling their logs back down to your centralized logging, and data is not being compromised or shipped off from an email program sitting on a server that shouldn't be sending email or shouldn't be sending confidential information within an email. And the last piece is DevOps, right? So we heard last year in Andre's keynote and a lot of the presentations, you've got to have DevOps in place. What does DevOps really mean, right? It's sort of the automation around deploying those applications or deploying new instances of those applications in a way that's supported by your organization. And really the overarching goal of DevOps in your run phase is to be able to build applications efficiently, test them quickly, and deploy them on a frequent basis. So you've got to really shift your entire organization, and at least your development organization, to be thinking within that paradigm to be able to build, test, and deploy those applications really quickly within your cloud paradigm.
Oh, I'm good.
You're good. And so the slide that I think is out of order was this, and this is the overall roadmap for Plan, Build, Run. So the first 4 steps are really the planning on how to plan to move your application to the cloud, and whether it's a custom app or a vendor app, those are the four steps that we sanction and believe are the right way to do it. 5th is build, and the last is run. So you'll see that 90% of, or 80% to be precise, of moving an application to the cloud is planning. 20% is build and run. So that's it. Questions?
Not all at once, guys. Come on.
Any questions? Good. Well,
Well, that's what happens at the end of the day. It's, oh yeah, 10 after 5, that's what happens. Oh, got a question.
My question is, when you do things like data, how do you make sure that the data is going on, how do you say exactly
So, yeah, well, so here's the thing. I would actually, I hate to answer a question with a question because I have more, it's just so that we have clarity. Do you currently utilize any kind of data access governance tool set? It's okay if it's a no. So the data access governance tools that are out there, and you may have, I don't really know all of the sessions that went on. There's got to be something that was at the show this year in that regard. What they do is you basically are saying, okay, what are the classifications of this data? What do we need to know in terms of Who can see what can be addressed, how can it be addressed, how do we track it, sort of like entitlements around the data aspect of it. The reason I'm bringing that up is the critical data will be locked down hopefully more effectively from that standpoint if we've got it properly classified. Now, what that means is when we go to move it over, we may not have the actual answer to know what we had here and moved over was 100% correct or not, but we do know that it's still, from a permissioning and entitlement perspective, who, and even in some cases, what can have access to it, so we limit that risk. As far as proving exactly that this piece here is exactly this piece, you know, this is kind of an emerging market. It's not just that. It's sort of like with blockchain and identity in the same sort of aspect of it. There are methods that are out there. They're not as widely utilized right now, but they're getting there. And, you know, you'll hear people, maybe it'll be the next thing. You always hear blockchain, blockchain, blockchain is a proof of, for proving that what is here is actually here. And right now, it's mostly a lot of talk that I see out there, not a lot of integration from that perspective. And I think that's why I went back to the lesser step, so to speak, of data access governance tools, which are out there and being used so that you limit the risk versus the true proof step of using a technology to make sure that what you had here when you moved it over was exactly the same. Because that's going to require something that not a lot of organizations as of yet are doing. There's some, but they're more bleeding edge. So technically, you want the true bleeding edge answer, start looking at some of these blockchain technologies.
Say I have Oracle database here. I have a number of tables. And when I move it, I want to make sure the same table has the same number of
Rows or records.
rows.
I hate to say it, in that particular case, that's when it's a good example. So we're looking specifically database move, right, with Oracle database. That, unfortunately, is something that it's not a simple answer that you're going to get from us. And why I say that is, that's when you say, okay, do I got a true Oracle DBA that can do that trust but verify step, I don't trust for us, and what would they recommend? Me not being an Oracle DBA, for example, on that one, I couldn't give you the exact answer for that, but what I would say to you is that's why you have to have one of those. So in this case, take that out of the mix. It's other technologies. It's the same thing. Who are the people who understand those technologies, or the, I don't want to say SMEs, but the truly can get their hands into the weeds of those, the administrative aspect of it. You need to get them involved to do that step.
I think, so a couple things that I want to add on to what Todd said. When you're moving just a plain database, right, you can use tools to do that, Informatica or whatever, and sync databases, and then do some sort of a cutover. When we've done it with, for example, a customer directory, like a CIAM type of directory, we'll create replicas, make sure that all of the data is replicated, and then we'll deprecate some of the instances. We'll turn off those instances of the directory and cut over to the new instances with all of our applications reading from those new directories. So it depends on the technology and the type of data that you're trying to migrate, really. Right?
Yeah, some have better tools than others to utilize against it. Yeah, very much so. Like the system they left, 1985, you might have more difficulty with. Yeah, interestingly enough, we've had a lot of sessions in this regard when we talk about business tactical purchases and how that affects us in point solutions, and then having to play catch up at the end. That's a big problem, right? And you're saying, well, do we go back to the well on this? Well, if they've already moved it over, it's not that easy to do so. At this point, they're basically saying, hey, I already did this, go take care of it, go secure it. And now, yeah, you're not doing a move. So this is sort of beyond what we're talking about. They've already moved it. Whether or not they followed the rules, proper procedures, et cetera, is a problem. The question now is, do I need to go back and now go to the assessment step to get a documentation, can I even get documentation, make sure it was done, and then fill in those gaps? It moves you from a cloud move to a post-mortem analysis, right? All of a sudden, you now have to go into CSI mode. I hate to say it.
I think it's also like when the first time you implement a CASB product in your organization, the first step is discover, right? And I would say that the step 1B is embrace, right? Then put under governance, and then put under, dictatorship, right? So the first thing you've got to do is figure out what's out there and why, right? Why is IT always looked as the impediment to business agility? So figure out what that is, figure out if they're using a sanctioned application, typically if they're using an AWS cluster for development or some sort of an application that they're trying to test out, and then put your security paradigm around it, right? And still allow business to be the enabler, allow IT to be the business enabler, and then put the governance around it to say, hey, this is how we need to enable our business to be able to do this with other AWS instances. Right, so we did this thing where we allowed our developers to put up AWS instances. Right, we went from $1,000 to $12,000 a month in a matter of a week. Right, but we embraced the technology and said this is the pattern that we say is allowable. Here are the tools that you can do to set this up, and we actually abstracted the GUIs from Amazon and built our own internal GUIs to allow them to build the machines the way that we would sanction them to be built. So you've got to embrace them. And then you go look for any rogue instances of public cloud instances, and then you put them under your dictatorship and just say those are not allowed anymore. So, Don, did you have a question? Or were you just clearing your throat? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Not at all. Not at all. So the base system, for example, for AWS server is whatever compliance regulation that you're responsible to meet, right? They say our base server is PCI compliant. Our base server is high trust compliant, right? You can find this certification on their website. Once you install your application, the entire thing is your problem. In the SaaS environment, it's the same thing. Right, Gartner has a really nice paper on how to negotiate with your SaaS vendor. The problem is the vendors have read it as well, and so they tell you that they're not going to negotiate with you. But we recommend, and we actually use, today we use Rapid7, but we change every year the vendor that we use. We pen test our cloud environments, whether it's public or private cloud environments for our customers.
Yeah, remember the old trust but verify, i.e. don't trust? Yeah, go back, make sure they're doing their due diligence.
So
and
you
doing
use,
what they promised.
yeah, you use somebody like Rapid7 to do pen testing, and then you use another organization, there's a billion out there to do the certification, whether it's HIPAA, high trust, or PCI. So you've got to still do what you do internally with external firms for your cloud servers. Does that answer your question?
Any other questions?
Any takers? Anybody coming to Fenway today? We're having a party with Bing? All right. Lots of takers. All right. Pardon? So email Paul or Todd independently, Paul at IDMWORKS or Todd at IDMWORKS.com. Great. Hey, thank you, everybody.
If you don't get it done and it doesn't go through, we're here at our booth tomorrow. No matter what, you'll see us get it.
Just look for the sumo.
Shoot that over. We got it. Yeah. Well, no, the big sumo's gone now. Hopefully you got a chance to see the big sumo. No? Oh. I went 0 for 5. I wrestled him yesterday. No joke. We had an event right after, and he literally came up to me and he just looked at me and he smiled and he got like that on my neck. I got scared for a second. He goes, boop, and just moved me off the mat. It's like, whoa, what's that? Yeah, afterwards. Yeah, go see him. He's got it. Yeah, thank you guys.